Today, I'm doing something I've never done before. I'm starting to offer something new on this channel. It won't replace the old stuff I've done before. I will keep doing reactions and analysis of performers and singers, but I'm adding a new layer. The new layer I'm adding today is I'm going to start reacting to and analyzing some of the top public speakers of our time and of the past. Hi, I'm Dr. Mark, and I'm going to help you sing and perform more like the top artists around the world. I'm a professional voice teacher, performance coach, and opera stage director. I've helped thousands of singers around the world learn the techniques and methods that got the top singers to where they are. So really quick, some context if you're wondering why am I doing this. Some of my most dedicated viewers here have noticed that it's been a while since I've put up a lot of YouTube videos. I think in the past 2 years, I put up probably 4 or 5, 3 of which were just in the past week. So it's been a while. What is going on? Well, one of the things that's been going on is I've had this opportunity to become an executive coach. It just kind of fell in my lap. Somehow, over the years, I've had a lot of different executives come into my private studio, either to work with me as a voice teacher or as just a presenting coach of how to give speeches and present to the public on video and live in a way that's genuine and authentic and really captures what they intend to communicate. And so that's kind of where I've been focusing my energy. So in an attempt to see if I can help offer some information and insight to some of those people I get to work with and anyone else who's interested, I thought, let's just talk about people who are talking and telling stories and trying to communicate in a way that motivates people and gets them to do things. Now, Tony Robbins, if you look online and you just Google top keynote speakers or top public speakers, Tony Robbins pops to the top of the list almost every time. He's all over the place. So I'm not going to be spending a whole lot of time talking about his content or analyzing what he's saying and why it's effective, the way he's saying it. That's important. That's valuable. But what I'm wanting to focus on is how he's communicating it with his body, with his voice. Why do we feel connected to him? Why does he feel so charismatic? Why do we care? It's not just the content. He has a lot of other skills, probably both developed and innate, that we can learn from. Today, I'm going to be reacting to and analyzing Tony Robbins. The initial video I'm going to watch is on how to brainwash yourself for success and destroy negative thoughts. And I'm probably going to compare it to younger years as well. So when we get there, I'll tell you what we're reacting to. But for now, let's do this.
You don't experience life, you experience the part of life you focus on, right? What's wrong is always available, so is what's right, right? And there are different kinds of focus. And my dad's focus that day was really on what he hadn't done. And I know that because he kept muttering it. You know, he hadn't taken care of his family, there's no money for Thanksgiving, somebody had to give us charity. And then the second decision you make about once you focus on something is what does it mean?
Okay, so this is the coming up. He'll talk more later, but let's give an initial reaction here. If you're like me, you're like, the first time you're hearing it, it's like, what happened to his voice? Did he damage it? Did he hurt it? I'm not going to talk about what's going on with his voice. I can guess that there's a lot of things. I guess you can probably go online, and if you Google what's wrong with Tony Robbins' voice, you'll probably find articles on it. Most likely, if I had to guess, from the little I know, it's because he's doing a lot of public speaking, really loud for hours and hours at a time, and he's experiencing vocal damage. Does that mean he's bad at it? No, it could mean that maybe there's a way to make it so it's more efficient, so he doesn't hurt his voice, so he doesn't damage it. Maybe he was born with some innate vocal issue of with his vocal folds or something else. That's something to research another day. So we're going to set that aside. But I want you to watch and pay attention here. The first thing I notice up here is just how dynamic he is. His voice, it's super expressive. We'll talk about what that means in a second. His body language is comfortable but expressive. We'll talk about it more here in a second. Let's watch some more.
Hey everyone, welcome back
Jay
to
Shetty.
On Purpose, the number
Here
one
we go.
health podcast in the world. Thanks to each and every single one of you that come back every week to listen, learn, and grow. Now today's guest is someone that I've wanted to sit down with ever since I was a very young boy. And it's extremely special to me to have this opportunity. I grew up in a home where I was surrounded by his books, his cassettes, his CDs. My father would be diving into them, playing them in the car, wherever he possibly could. And I was surrounded by this man's wisdom. And it had an impact on me, both internally, externally, and in so many ways. And today I've had the great fortune of sitting with him for this podcast and this interview. I'm speaking about a man who needs no introduction, that is recently the number one New York Times bestselling author of this book, Life Force, the one and only Tony Robbins. Tony, I am so honored, humbled, and grateful to be in your presence.
Okay, so I let this play for a little bit with Jay Shetty just because I was interested, and I think it might prove to be a good contrasting piece to compare these two voices a little bit. We'll see. Not about better or worse, but what they're doing. So with Jay, you're going to notice a few things. One, there's a lot of mobility in his mouth and his jaw. That freedom, that mobility, that lack of tension is going to help with diction, with intelligibility of what he's saying. It's also going to have another side effect, and that's going to make him slow down his words a little bit. One of the biggest errors people make is they talk too fast, and they say too many words per sentence. They make it too complex. When we're talking slower, we have to talk more simple as well because we're slower. We can't say as many words in one breath. So, some interesting things just in watching him. You'll notice he's using his hands. They're visible on the screen. So for those of you who are on Zoom a lot, think about that. How do I get my hands visible on the screen so they can see it? They can feel that. The hands have so much to communicate. Let's see what we learn from Tony.
Thank you, brothers. Thanks for coming to visit.
To be in your home, you've opened up your home today. This is the first time we brought On Purpose out into the wild
I'm honored.
for a guest to be with you, but we're in your beautiful home that you've graciously, and Sage was just an amazing host and
Thank you.
welcomed me so beautifully. And I want everyone to know also that I came here expecting that we were going to do a podcast. Tony, of course, is one of the busiest humans on the planet. We just sat down and we spent nearly an hour together just connecting and talking because of his kindness and generosity. And I want people to know
the
that.
work you're doing. I wanted to hear more about it. So it's gorgeous what you're doing here. So thanks for having me on.
So pause. You'll notice how genuinely excited Jay Shetty is to be talking with Tony. What makes him so powerful is how generous, he says those words, how gracious and how kind he was, how he took an hour just to connect and to talk. He valued one-on-one connection. So here's a public figure who's used to presenting to hundreds of thousands of people, and he's taking time for one person. Now, why does that matter when it's coming to public speaking? It matters for a lot of reasons. One of the reasons it matters is because you can tell when someone gets up to give a public speech and there's someone who does this day in, day out, not the speaking part, but does the caring about a person, connecting, trying to make someone else feel heard, valued, and cared for. It shows in their public speaking because that public speaker gets up and they are thinking about all these people they've connected with and imagining that they are talking to that person. It makes it powerful. It makes us and the audience feel like they care, they know us, they love us because that's what they're communicating and it's genuine. Not because they necessarily know us personally. They might be able to be genuine on that level, but because in their brain, they're talking to the people they care about most and not just to some audience who's not connected with them at all. Lots to learn just from this insight we're learning about Tony Robbins on a personal level. The few stories I've heard about Tony all corroborate this, that he is extremely generous. He'll invite people into his home, which is such a personal space. He's inviting them into his most vulnerable place and showing care and concern and taking care of people. So the reality is, and it's a hard one, if we really want to reach the top levels, it can't just be about the performance. It has to become about being the person that people want to be like. And Tony has a lot of that. Let's see what else.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you so much. So this conversation is a long time coming from the work that you've been doing. The journey of this book doesn't start when you started writing this book.
Yeah.
The journey of this book for you became something that you got focused on a long, long time ago.
Yeah, true.
And I wanted to focus on one point to give people this context. You know, you're seen as someone who's superhuman. You're able to do incredible things on stage, off stage. You have a phenomenal physical, mental, psychological presence. You have a beautiful spiritual presence. But at the same time, you talk about in this book being 31 years old and finding out about this brain tumor.
Yes.
I want to hear about what that feels like when you think you're doing everything right for your health.
Yeah.
And it hasn't been a point of concern. And all of a sudden, you get this news. How does that feel?
Well, it was scary, obviously. Actually, it started a little sooner than that. When I was really young, I grew up really rapidly. I've worked 20-hour days, and I was also blessed. And I got to work with some very important people, and I got great results, and they told other people. So by the time I was 19, just almost 20, I had become quite successful in external terms, at least, in the world. And some part of me was, you know, the mechanism in the back of our head, that 2 million year old brain, right? The fight or flight mechanism. I didn't know how to manage that so well. And part of my brain was like, well, maybe you have all this happening so quick because you're going to die young. And I literally became obsessed with not just getting hit by a truck or something. It was cancer. I was going to wilt away. I don't know where it came from. And I knew better intellectually, but it was there.
So let's talk about some technical issues. Number one, when we're saying he's expressive vocally, you realize there's some raspiness there. There's obviously his voice has taken a beating, but it's still expressive. How? Well, dynamically. Dynamically, he's getting louder and softer. He's emphasizing verbs and adjectives, which any good storyteller will do. He slows down on those moments. He gives a variety of speed. He has a wide range of pitch. His words are going to higher frequencies and lower frequencies of pitch. You can think on a piano, he's exhibiting a large range there. That is what a person does, how a person talks when they're naturally comfortable. When they're in a comfortable situation, when you're watching a kid who's in their element, when we're watching an adult that's just sitting there talking with their closest friends, we see these highs and these lows and all these things in between, and this body language that is exhibiting high energy with low flex. High energy means he's putting a lot of intensity, emotion, thought, concern behind what he's saying. He has a strong opinion about what he's saying. Low flex means when we're looking at his body or his voice, there's nowhere that's grabbing. It's not flexing in a tight way. Yes, it's flexing in that it has to flex. Muscles have to flex to move. They're constantly flexing and relaxing. But it's the difference between someone who's gripping something and just gently holding something. He's doing it with intensity. He's moving. He's flexible. There's no grip. And so that combination of high energy in his body and expression and in his voice with low flex makes us feel engaged, but not stressed. We feel comfortable. He's helping us feel comfortable so that we can engage with what he's saying. If we're not comfortable, interesting enough, he's talking about this fight or flight, this million-year-old brain. If we trigger that brain as we're presenting, people can't really listen to us anymore. They can't hear us for our intent in what we're trying to say. They start listening it through the lens of fight or flight or survival, or pushing us away because we seem stressed and we're stressing them out. It's a negative interaction. So it's really crucial to be able to help them feel comfortable on a subconscious level. I can't emphasize it enough. This is not learning to communicate on an intellectual level. This is learning to go deeper than that. so that we can communicate and connect with people on a subconscious, hardwired, deep way where even if they didn't necessarily understand a word they would saying, they would still understand our intent by our tone of voice and our body language.
And then the first time I entered my life was before 31. I entered my life through someone else, my girlfriend. And she came home crying uncontrollably. And Jay, I mean, she was like, what is it? What is it? My mom. And then my mom has cancer. And then even worse, they gave her 9 weeks to live. They just sent her home. And I think if it would have been me, I think my fear would have overcome me. But you know, most people will do more for people they love, whether it be their kids or their family or someone else, than they'll ever do for themselves. And so...
Okay. So an interesting little tell here that is actually giving Tony away a little bit. This is going to sound like a criticism, but I'm going to back it up with something else in a second. First is you'll notice he keeps checking in with the camera. The person he's talking to is over here, but he keeps checking in with the camera. And that would be perceived as potentially an error, a mistake. It's ruining the illusion that he's having this conversation and we're just voyeuristic in that we're watching it. We're seeing it from the side. It's not, this kind of presentation style is not intended for us to feel like we are being confronted with Tony Robbins and we're having the conversation. This is presented as if we're watching in on this conversation, right? But he keeps checking over at the camera, not looking into the camera. And in fact, that's what gives it away. He's not looking into the camera. He seems to be checking in with who's behind the camera. Now, I don't know. Maybe there's no one behind the camera. But you'll notice it's not a direct connection with the center of that lens, right there. It's slightly off, which again, to me, actually makes this feel way more genuine. He's trying to include everyone in the room in this conversation, even the person behind the camera. So something that might be a technical mistake, if we are trying to really lock into this, can actually move us as an audience even more because it's a subtle clue that what he's saying is genuine. He's not ignoring this false pretense that there's a camera staring at him. He's actually acknowledging the person behind it and trying to include them in this conversation. It's kind of cool. And I think that's something that we can learn, that instead of being obsessed with being perfect and doing things always technically right, that those are just tools to hopefully free us to be more expressive, more genuine, more authentic, more real, so that we can connect with people without throwing up any barriers or putting any friction between us or people or putting any perceived walls up, that we're just trying to keep it genuine, authentic, and real and human. And he does that really gorgeously here. So what I want to do here, as we're talking here, is I really want to jump over to a younger video just because I'm curious to hear what his voice would sound like. So I'm going to jump to this other video that looks to be quite a bit older. I think probably about 7 years ago, if I remember when I was downloading and looking at the upload date. And this is the secret to true fulfillment in life. Let's see what we learn from it and compare it to what we're seeing here.
There was a day that I became wealthy. I'll tell you the day, I know that day I was rich. I was broke. I was pissed. I was angry at everybody else but who? Myself. But really underneath it, I was mad at myself. I just couldn't beat myself up anymore, so I was pissed. And I had a friend that I loaned money to when I had barely enough, and I knew he needed it. And I gave him $1,200, and I'm here not able to eat. I'm down to like $25, $26. And I'm saying to him, calling him, and he's not returning my call.
Okay. So interesting. Even at this point, his voice is still showing that it's been beaten up, right? And he was talking to him in the interview earlier, working 20-hour days as a really young guy. So I have to guess, and this actually happens with a lot of really seasoned performers, that he put so much intensity into it and did it so hard for so long that there's damage. It's probably permanent at this point. It'd be fun to do, Tony, if you happen to ever watch this and want to experiment with seeing what we can do with your voice, I'd be happy to. But what's interesting as we're looking at this is I wonder what would happen if he would have had training early of how to present and talk with the same amount of intensity without putting the same kind of strain on his voice. What's interesting here is you'll notice when I was talking about before of low flex, high intensity, that there actually is a lot of flex in his neck. That he's trying to work so hard, probably because it takes a lot of effort to get that sound out through those damaged vocal cords. And so my question here, as I'm seeing here, is I'm looking at this video that seems to be 7 years before, seeing a lot of the same things that probably initially got him his success. Obviously, the content is brilliant. There's so much insight and wisdom there. But more than that, his intensity and how genuine he is, how just human he is, right? And honestly, some of the vocal damage adds to that. If it was too perfect, if it was too smooth, too controlled, it might read as less genuine. I don't know. Kind of interesting, something to consider. That's one area that I wish we could help him let go of, because it'd only add to the genuineness and authenticity. This flex in here makes us subconsciously concerned for him a little bit. Maybe that's not all bad. Maybe that makes us more empathetic and listening and caring. But I think we'd find that we would be able to hear him even easier. He would be able to relax and actually be even more spontaneous and more engaged himself if we're able to get this to relax and release. Let's watch just a little bit more of this.
And I just need some money, and he's ignoring me. I didn't ignore him, so I'm pissed. I'm frustrated. In the midst of all this, I'm also pragmatic. I got 25 and change, call it $26. What the hell am I gonna do? I don't have any plans for economics. I got overhead that's crazy. I'm living in this little tiny apartment, 400 square feet in Venice, California. So I thought, okay, when I was totally broke early on, when I was 17, I used to save my money up and go to the smorgasbord and load up for Christmas, load up for the week.
So I want to point something out here as we're wrapping up. This is symmetrical gestures. So gestures that are equally balanced on both sides. So if we're here, if I was to talk like this, equally symmetrical. That actually reads as false, as someone that's lying and not being genuine and authentic on a subconscious level. We can watch that all over the place. Things that are too symmetrical are not natural. They're not organic. That's not how our brain works. So the temptation would be like, well, that's what he's doing here. No, it's not actually. If you watch him closely, hand is always just a little more dominant. Saying don't do symmetrical gestures doesn't just mean that it can't be close, that we can't use both hands. We can use both hands. And when we really mean what we're saying, we use both hands. And he has so much intensity that he's going to use both hands. It's about, instead of being perfectly symmetrical, just making a little bit off and doing it that way. Well, why would I have to even worry about that? Isn't that just something we do naturally? Well, the problem is when we get in stressed environments, and maybe by this point, Tony doesn't get nervous in front of an audience at all. Like he just is super relaxed. I wouldn't be surprised if that is the case because of all his experience. But for those that aren't, when we get in those stress situations, our body will light up, our brain will light up in a way where it's going to make us want to do symmetrical gestures. We're not going to be able to help it. It's a sign of stress. So just being aware that all of a sudden, if my awareness comes to that, they're perfectly symmetrical and I can just shift them just a little bit, it's going to make a big difference. There's a lot more we could talk about with Tony Robbins. We just barely scratched the surface. I'll have to circle back to some of his other lectures. So far, just these few minutes is a masterclass in great presentation skills of the things that I'm talking about, of being genuine, authentic, human, real, someone that audiences connect with, want to listen to, want to understand, that motivates people to do something. And ultimately, that's an executive's job. Don't forget to check me out on fyvconsulting.com for those of you that want an executive coaching. If you're one of my other viewers that love singing and want to take a singing lesson, you can find that and me on foundyourvoice.com. Either way, I would be happy to work with you. And I hope to see you next time, especially as I do more of these videos. React below. Tell me what you like, what you don't, what you want more of or less as I try to figure out adding these new reaction analysis videos to public speakers. See you next time.